listening to Murder Mystery History, the show where we go back in time to explore the darker side of history. We examine murders and sinister crimes from long ago, covering both famous and forgotten crimes. This week we're going back to 1879 in Atlanta, Georgia, to look at the grisly slaying of an elderly couple at the hands of an axe murderer. A bizarre case complete with brutality, eerie twists, multiple confessions, and racist police investigators bent on solving the crime. Evidence be damned. This is the murder of Martin and Susan DeFoor. Our story starts with Martin DeFoor, born 17th of September 1805 in Franklin, Georgia, the son of James and Elizabeth DeFoor. In 1830, Martin married a woman by the name of Susan Tabor. Together they had 5 children, all girls: Elizabeth, Martha, Louisa, Elisa, and Susan. In the 1840s, they briefly moved to Panthersville before settling in the Bolton area by the Chattahoochee River in 1853. Martin became the operator of the Montgomery Ferry, which he later renamed to the DeFoor Ferry. I can't confirm this 100%, but I think I've come across a military record of Martin's suggesting that he fought in the American Civil War and he was part of the 24th Infantry in the Confederate Army. There are also records suggesting that the DeFoor Ferry was actually destroyed during the Civil War, but then it was put back into operation once the war was over. So just interesting tidbits about Martin DeFoor, which, there's not a lot of information on him or on Susan. Really, there's only limited bits and pieces out there on the whole DeFoor family. But what we do know is that they're very well respected in the community. They're well liked. They're considered to be, very nice, polite. They don't have any enemies. They kind of keep to themselves. They're also quite well to do. They've got quite a lot of land. They run this, quite successful ferry, obviously. They've got some farming land, some livestock, things like that. So they do pretty well for themselves. And you can't really find people saying anything negative about them. And then, of course, they also live quite close by. It looks like family is quite big with them as well, because their daughter Louisa lives right across the road from them with her husband Felix and their children. Their daughter Elizabeth also lives very close by with her husband Thomas. So they're all quite close by and quite tight-knit by the look of things. Now, on July 26, 1879, Martin Walker is the 25-year-old grandson of Martin and Susan DeFoor. He's out on his morning walk. He lives across the road from his grandparents. He lives with his mum and dad. And it's around 6 o'clock in the morning when he notices that neither Martin or Susan are out tending to the farm. This is out of character. It's out of the ordinary. You see, they're usually very early risers. He's used to seeing them up at as early as 4 o'clock in the morning. So he thinks, maybe I'll go check it out, see if they're okay. He approaches the house. He sees the front is all locked up, all closed. When he goes around the back of the house, he sees that the back door is open. The foot-long bolt that's used to fasten the door is sitting loose in the garden, like it's been removed. This is very strange. He can see into the house, and from a distance, he can see that his grandparents are still in bed. Not only that, but there appears to be a lamp still burning on their bed. Something seems amiss, so he ventures in to check on them. As he draws closer, he's horrified to find that his grandparents, Martin and Susan DeFoor, are covered in blood. The victims of a vicious crime. They are both dead. Young Martin raises the alarm and he alerts his family as well as the police. Pretty soon, detectives are coming from near and far to investigate the case. It becomes like very big locally. All the newspapers are picking it up because it's such a violent murder against two just such innocent people who have no enemies. These aren't people who are like known for criminal activity. These aren't, low lifes. These aren't lower class thugs. It's a nice little family that sort of just lives on the river, by the river. They run a ferry business. Who would do this? Police arrive, and on observing the bodies, they find that Martin DeFoor has 2 major cuts on the side of his neck, cutting through his artery, breaking into the bone. Susan DeFoor has been hacked at so aggressively that she's almost decapitated. Almost. There's no signs of any kind of struggle, and by all appearances, it seems that the bloody murder was likely over before the DeFoors even knew what was happening. It looks very much like they've been killed in their sleep and they had no chance to even react. Key investigators include Sheriff William Wilson and Captain Starnes, amongst several other detectives who visit to weigh in with their professional opinions and contribute to the investigation. And it almost seems like there are so many names that pop up in the policing side of this that it almost seems a little bit like too many cooks in the kitchen as I'm reading it. Investigators search the home for clues and any signs of a motive. And as stated, the DeFoors, they were generally very well respected. They didn't have any enemies. No one had a reason to hate them. They kept to themselves. They operated their business. They were courteous and polite to people. It was hard for anyone to picture any possible reason why anyone would kill such good-natured and harmless and, again, might I say, elderly people. They were in their 70s. In fact, I believe that Susan was around 80, 81. The murder weapon is left at the scene of the crime, and it's been discarded in the fireplace. The murder weapon is an axe, and it's covered in blood and ash. Martin Walker quickly identifies this as his own axe, which he had left outside the previous day. So it was quite accessible. It was out in the open. Someone could easily just cross the road, pick it up, and get it. There are signs in the house that the offenders had rummaged through belongings, including a bureau in the bedroom. But the only things missing are a pair of Martin's boots, Martin's wallet, which had no money in it, only a promissory note, and, curiously, Martin's pocketbook is also missing. And it's believed that his pocketbook contained mainly receipts, as well as a list of people that he had lent money to, as he was known to loan money to those in need, because he was quite well-to-do. Police tend to rule out robbery as a motive, since 18 silver dollars were left untouched in the bureau. There was also a bag of nickels, which was untouched. And whilst cleaning up the house the following day, the DeFoor children find $110 in cash stashed away in the pitcher. Also, it's possible that the offenders missed this, but there's still so much money in this house stashed away that you would think if they were going to, go to the effort of killing Martin and Susan, that they would have a really thorough search to, make it worth their while, I guess. Martin's boots are found discarded outside about 400 yards away. They're found in the vicinity of some corn husks and watermelon rinds. Investigators continue to search over the place for clues, and they find multiple footprints which they don't believe belong to either Martin or Susan. They can find at least 2 different sets of tracks, including one set that appears to be by a barefoot individual. They also find a muddy boot print on the windowsill. Now, the DeFoor house it's quite a large property. It's a 2-story wooden home, like this big cottage. But the DeFoor family state that neither Martin or Susan go upstairs very often. It's very seldom that they go up there. There's a spare bedroom up there, but there's not much need for them to go there. They normally spend most of their time out tending to the farm and downstairs in the main area. Now here's where it gets really creepy. When investigators check the upstairs bedroom, they find that the bed has very clearly been used. It's been slept in recently. There is mud on the sheets, keeping in mind that they found mud on the windowsill as well. Not only that, but they find that someone has clearly urinated in a nearby basket full of cotton, and they find human excrement in the room. And this human excrement is also found to contain watermelon seeds. They also find that the back door, which Martin Walker had found open, appeared to have been opened from the inside out. So it becomes clear to investigators that whoever killed Martin and Susan had very likely already been hiding in their house for probably at least a full day, maybe even more. The upstairs bedroom was seldom visited. There's no telling how long someone could have stayed up there for without being detected. Police question everyone in the area, including the local DeFoor children. Louisa DeFoor notes that 2 transients had stopped by Martin and Susan's house 2 days prior and asked if they could have food and lodging for the evening, but Martin turned them away. Martin had also told his daughter that he'd seen a fairly well-dressed man walking at the back of his orchard, and also the same night, so this is the night before they're found, an African-American man was seen approaching Martin DeFoor, and he asked Martin for directions to Marietta. This man would be identified by locals as Asa Gunn. Now, the public immediately jumps to blaming transients. There was a lot of fear at the time of violent homeless people traveling across the state, with concerns that they could turn to violence out of their desperation. There were elements that this crime could have been committed by a transient. There were just elements of the situation that suggested that. There was this theory that the offender likely could have been a poor person, and perhaps they just wanted a spare set of shoes. Maybe they just wanted a meal for the night. Maybe they just needed shelter. Maybe they were cold, and it's possible that they could have come into the house. Maybe that's why they discarded the shoes, because they didn't fit. Perhaps they chose to hide out in Martin and Susan's house just for shelter and food, and for whatever reason they decided to escalate a simple matter of trespassing, which is a crime in itself, but escalate that into murder. Police decide to follow up on leads from the locals in the area, and they begin targeting African Americans. They speak with a man by the name of Bob Justice. He's listed as both Bob Justice and Bob Justice, so I'm going to call him Bob Justice because that sounds much more badass. It sounds like a professional wrestler or like a bounty hunter from Texas, like, I'm Bob Justice. I just enjoy that name a great deal. Anyway, he's been named by someone locally who believes that he may have been involved in it. Police go and investigate him and question him. Captain Starnes questions him, but he's got a good alibi suggesting that he was nowhere near the murder or the DeFoor's house at the night of the murder. But police are especially interested in Asa Gunn, who the DeFoor's family had seen talking to Martin the night before he was discovered dead. Now, Asa Gunn, I just point out again, Asa Gunn and Bob Justice, like that would be just a badass buddy cop film, I think. But anyway, Gun and Justice. Sorry. Asa has a criminal history. He has been convicted of robbery before, and then he was sent to work on a plantation to work off his sentence. But he ended up escaping from the plantation. So he's, I guess, technically at large. Like, I think police still want to arrest him, but they have more reason to now because they believe, he's He's ticking all the boxes for police in the 1800s. He's a person of color, and he's got a criminal background. So that to them, that's as good as a confession to them. So they're quite convinced that he probably had a part in it because he was seen in the area the night of the offense. Now, using a pack of bloodhounds, the police track down Asa Gunn. And what happens next is some truly horrific police work. So, if Asa and his legal counsel are to be believed, and there's no reason not to believe them, the police pursued Asa. They chased him down with hounds, and he was attacked and bitten by these dogs. Police then struck Asa with a shovel, hit him over the head, and put a noose around his neck, and they threatened to hang him then and there unless he confessed to the murder of the DeFoors. Asa blurted out a confession. He stated that he was there at the DeFoor house and that he was in the company of 2 white men, and he insisted that all he did was hold the lamp for them whilst they killed Martin and Susan. Now, this is what is known as a forced confession. It's a confession under duress. It's horrible and has no place in modern justice or any kind of justice, because it's forcing this person to... They basically said, if you don't confess or admit to this horrific crime, we're going to kill you. There is something interesting of note, though, because it's reported that whilst the police are talking to Asa, after they've stopped assaulting him and setting dogs on him, of course, that he was able to describe the DeFoor household quite intricately. He knows the placement of things, the appearance of the inside. He's able to describe even like the appearance of a clock that was on the wall in the house. And he also knows, like, he's able to describe the location of Martin DeFoor's boots. If Asa Gunn is innocent, he has a very bizarre and yet fairly accurate knowledge of the DeFoor's residence for some reason, suggesting that regardless of if he's innocent or guilty, it seems like he has been inside that house. Come August of 1879, a man by the name of George Johnson is also arrested, another African-American man. He's arrested in Alabama under suspicion of murdering the DeFoors. This is all while Asa Gunn is still in custody. There's not a lot of information out there about George Johnson. I could really only find like one article from the Opelika Observer, but it suggests that George was arrested in Alabama and he was found with a blade on him that resembled like the end of a scythe. And it's reported that they believe this is the murder weapon that killed Susan and Martin. This makes zero sense given that it was already established the murder weapon was Martin Walker's axe. And obviously you would think that a simple like scythe-like blade is probably going to look different to like the wound from an axe. Like they're going to have a different result from attacking them like that. Because you have to remember, as grisly as it is, Susan's head was almost cleft from her body as it was described in the newspapers. You're probably more likely to get that from an axe than just a blade that someone's walking around with. So the article also points out that there's some real poor police work going on, and that there's already been a bit of a miscarriage of injustice because, miscarriage of justice, a great injustice, given that the belief is that you've got George Johnson and Asa Gunn, and the feeling is that at least one of them is probably innocent. So in July of 1880, after a year in police custody, Asa Gunn goes to trial and he is sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Martin and Susan DeFoor. However, this ruling ends up being overturned. See, Asa has this great legal counsel called Frank Harrelson. And this guy, he's excellent, and he publicly goes to the papers to talk about how terrible the police are and how awful this case is against Asa. He points out that Asa was forced to confess while he had dogs attacking him and a noose around his neck. Not only that, but he reminds people that Asa hasn't even technically confessed to a murder. Even if his confession was true, he's only confessed to having been an accomplice, but not actually carrying out the murder. Further to that, Asa never actually confesses in court. The judge issues him with a suspended sentence, and Harrelson makes a motion for a new trial. So, several months later, January of 1881, Asa Gunn returns to court for his second trial. Here, Captain Crease, who was present when Asa was arrested, admits that there were threats of hanging when he initially got his confession. The judge this time deems all the confessions are inadmissible due to the fact that they were given under duress and out of fear. The prosecution, without the power of confessions to help their case, basically throws in the towel, and they agree that a no guilty verdict is the way to go because they just don't have a case, even though they've got all these confessions, but all these confessions have been thrown out because of the horrible police work. Basically, he confessed because he thought he was going to die if he didn't. So Asa Gunn is set free, thanks in large part to Frank Harrelson's efforts as well. All goes quiet for a long time. I can't find anything on George Johnson, but it appears he was never formally charged and never went to court. In 1883, 4 years after the murder, things start to pick up again. There are rumors that a man in Macon, Georgia, by the name of Joe Johnson, was involved in the murder of the DeFoors. It's essentially a big, stupid game of telephone. Joe tells his wife that he was involved in the murder. His wife tells a friend who tells a friend, and eventually someone's friend who hears this rumor ends up telling this to the chief of police. Now, of course, you hear this kind of gossip and hearsay through a long chain of people. Things get muddled up. It's all gossip and hearsay. It really has no weight. But this is the 1800s, and the chief of police has just heard hearsay that a black man may have killed 2 white people. So immediately, Joe Johnson is arrested and put on a train to Atlanta. Johnson is interrogated, and he's actually pretty forthcoming with everything he knows. He basically confesses and tells police everything. He is very knowledgeable on the murder of the DeFoors, and he's able to even draw a reasonably accurate diagram of their home and floor plan layout, and he basically explains what happened. He dobs in his 2 criminal companions, 2 men by the name of John Brown and Tom Savinger. Savinger is quickly arrested as he lives only a short distance away from the DeFoors' home, and not long after that, John Brown is also arrested. In fact, with Tom Savinger, he had actually been arrested on the day of the murder, likely for being a person of color in close proximity to a crime, but he was released on lack of evidence. Savinger is really evasive, and he denies any involvement in the murder. When he's asked if he knows who Joe Johnson is, he says he has no idea. In order to prove that Johnson knows who Savinger is, the police decide on a little experiment. They put a group of people into the same cell with Savinger, so there's about half a dozen people in there. Then the police walk Joe Johnson over to Savinger's cell, and he gets to look at him through the bars. And one by one, he has them come up to the bars. Each person come up to the bars, and he asks Joe, "Is this Savinger? Is this Savinger?" And he keeps saying no until they get to the last one, who comes up and says, "Is this Savinger?" He looks at him for a long time and says, "Yes, that's Tom Savinger." And he was correct. The one person he said, "Yeah, that's Tom Savinger," happened to be Tom Savinger. But Savinger, he denies knowing Johnson. He still pretends like, "I have no idea who you are. I don't know what you're talking about." He plays dumb, basically. And Johnson, he makes a statement, and here's a statement that's actually published in the Atlanta Constitution newspaper. I'll read it, the bulk of it here. "I am going to tell you the truth, and nothing else but the truth. One Friday evening, Brown and Savinger came to my house and asked me to go fishing with them. I was then living at the railroad house on the state road 5 miles from town, and I often went fishing. When they came and asked for me and my wife were at home, and after talking with her about it, I agreed to go. I got ready and we all started. We walked up the railroad about 1.5 miles until we came to the DeFoor crossing, and then we turned off to go down by his house. This crossing is a private wagon way through Mr. DeFoor's farm, and we had to go through the gate. After passing through the gate, we crossed the branch and came to a pine thicket, about 75 yards from the house, where we stopped. Here we all sat down, and after talking a short while, Brown said, "There is a good place to get some money." "Where?" I asked, and he pointed to Mr. DeFoor's house and said, "There." I asked him how, and then he said we could kill the old folks and get their money, and no one would know who did it. Savinger said that they were old and lived there alone, and that no one would know anything about it. I told them I didn't want to have anything to do with it, and would leave them if that was what they were up to. When I said this, Brown struck me on the eye, and the next day my face was all swollen up. He then pointed a pistol at me and said that he and Tom was going down there and were going to kill the old people and get their money, and if I didn't go along, they would kill me. Tom said, yes, he has come this far and we don't intend to let him back out now. Then we all talked about it and got up and started towards the house. We went between the barn and the house. Brown walked in front. I was the middle and Savinger was behind. They seemed to be afraid I would run away and kept me around. When we came to the yard gate, Brown opened it and we all three went in. Then Brown said he would go around the house and we should go onto the kitchen door where he would meet us, for we had made our plans to go in through the back of the house. By the time Savinger and I got to the kitchen door, Brown came around the house and joined us. He had an axe in his hand, and we stood by the door and listened a few seconds. Then Savinger opened the kitchen door with something. I don't know what it was. It took a long while to open the door, and while Savinger was doing that, Brown and I kept a sharp watch. After the door was open, Brown told us to take off our shoes, and we then took them off and laid them down outside the door. Then we went into a big room and opened another door, which was not locked and which led us into the kitchen. Between the kitchen and the bedroom, there was another door, but this door was open, and we all slipped up to it. Brown was in front and had the axe. Savinger was next, and I was behind. When we all got around the door, Savinger struck a match, and as he did it, Brown jumped into the room, and he did the work. I was standing on one side of the door, and Savinger was on the other side, holding the burning match in his hand, and it was while this one match was burning that Brown killed the old people. I could hear the licks as the axe descended in its death stroke and shuddered, and wished myself well away. Johnson goes on to explain that they then searched the house for belongings. Brown put the axe in the fireplace, and they left. Brown and Savinger counted the money they took, but Johnson states he took none, and he doesn't know how much Brown and Savinger actually took. Brown also notes that he has no knowledge of what happened to Martin's boots, which I think is kind of important, but I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Johnson says in an article in the Atlanta Constitution on June 2nd, 1883, that he doesn't know Asa Gunn personally, but he knew that he was arrested for the crime and that he was completely innocent of it. Johnson had said nothing, and he distanced himself from Brown and Savinger as they'd threatened to kill him if he ever told anyone what happened. Police say that they're confident now that they have the right men, which funnily enough they said pretty much the same thing when they arrested Asa Gunn. Our boy Frank Harrelson returns. This time he's brought in to defend Tom Savinger and John Brown. Savinger and Brown continue their defense that they had nothing to do with it. They claim to barely know each other and to not know Joe Johnson at all. But Joe Johnson's confession is strong and pretty damning if it's to be believed. The case goes to trial in December of 1883, and Savager and Brown are both convicted of the murder of Martin and Susan DeFoor, and they're both scheduled to be hanged on January 11th, 1884. So it seems like everything's wrapped up. After 4.5 years, 2 men are convicted of the murder. They'll finally hang. The DeFoor family will finally have justice. But then, the day of the hanging, a motion is made for a new trial as Frank Harrelson saves the day again. The hanging is cancelled and the case continues. Many months pass by with prosecution and defence building their cases, but then on the 22nd of August 1884, Frank Harrelson comes to Brown and Savager in their cell and he gives them news. They're going to be released. The judge has decided to throw out the case based on a lack of evidence. Upon reviewing everything, it's decided that there are inconsistencies in Johnson's story. Harrelson continues the belief that Joe Johnson is likely the guilty party here and that he was dragging Brown and Savager with him and that they were innocent people that he tried to throw under the bus, basically. Savager and Brown, they leave after spending over a year in lockup, with Savager learning that his wife died whilst he was in jail, and now he doesn't know where his kids are either. The Atlanta Constitution reports that Brown and Savager disappeared into the crowd after leaving jail, looking a little bit lost, but one of them commented on having a hunger for watermelon, as they'd not eaten melon in quite a few years. Johnson was never convicted either, having also been eventually released. There were inconsistencies in his story, namely that he claimed that they never went upstairs. They never touched Martin's boots. He knew very little about what was actually taken, and there were minor things out of place with how Johnson described the home compared to how police found it. It wasn't really enough for a conviction, even though he still seemed to have a strong knowledge of the DeFoor household. Another thing to note is that suspicion had fallen somewhat on the DeFoor family. It's worth noting that only a month after their death, Thomas Moore, the son-in-law of Martin and Susan, immediately tore down the house and used the wood from Martin and Susan's house to construct a barn on his own property. The DeFoor's land was promptly sold for $6,000, which was then split up and shared between the DeFoor children. I feel like not even leaving the DeFoor's home a month before you decide to tear it down and make it into a barn comes off as like very callous and unsentimental, to the point that it's maybe almost a little bit suspicious, but it's not really damning. And, of course there is suspicion that perhaps Martin and Susan were killed so the children could get their inheritance sooner. But outside of the murder weapon belonging to Martin Walker, there's nothing to suggest that this was an inside job. And Martin's axe was easily accessible and nearby, so it really wasn't like suspicious that his axe was used as the weapon. It doesn't seem like police ever really had any serious suspicion on him or any members of the DeFoor family. To this day, there's been no conviction that has stuck in the long term. Justice was never served, but in the failure to serve justice, there were a lot of injustices. Police kind of just fell for tunnel vision when it came to targeting local African American population. Back then, it just seemed like that was probably the easiest target. Well, it's either transient people or it's African Americans. It couldn't possibly be a well-to-do white man or something. That could never happen. And I think it's interesting to note that Martin DeFoor had seen a well-dressed man walking at the back of his property like the day before he was murdered, which I think is interesting. It's entirely possible that Asa Gunn could have been a suspect. Threatening to hang him if he didn't provide a confession, though, is the opposite of good police work. It's corruption in its most discriminative form. And if Asa Gunn was guilty, he was let off the hook due to the manner in which the police grossly mistreated him. So if he was guilty and police had just carried things out by the book, maybe they could have actually gotten the culprit, but we'll never really know because of that. It's curious that both Asa Gunn and Joe Johnson had such an in-depth knowledge of the DeFoor's household, to the point that you would have to believe that they'd both been in the house. The big question is, why was the upstairs bedroom used? It was clearly slept in, but according to Johnson, none of them went upstairs. My personal theory, and this is a bit of a hot take, but I think that everyone here is telling the truth to a very certain point. And then I think there's a lot of lies and a lot of muddling going on. But I believe that Asa Gunn was in the DeFoor household the night of the murder. I don't think he committed the murder, but I think he had stopped there earlier in the evening to ask for directions, as other people had witnessed. And it's entirely possible that perhaps he could have decided he's done traveling for the day and he wants to, have a bed to sleep in tonight. So perhaps he was able to sneak into the house whilst Martin and Susan were tending to their land, tending to their cows, perhaps, visiting family across the road. And instead, Asa went inside and went upstairs and hid up in the upstairs bedroom. That same evening, Joe Johnson, John Brown, and Tom Savinger came in with sinister intentions. They committed the murder as Joe Johnson described, and perhaps did a quick search of the house and then left, perhaps blissfully unaware that Asa Gunn was squatting in the house upstairs in secret. And then Asa likely fled the scene when he realized what had happened. It makes sense as well because Asa could recall the location of Martin's shoes, which suggests to me that he may have tried to put them on as he left, but they didn't fit. Meanwhile, Joe Johnson had no knowledge of where, anything about these shoes. Like, he never mentioned anyone trying on the shoes or anything. So I feel like perhaps Asa Gunn was there, and maybe he kind of just, obviously his confession is so muddled up and messed up because, he made it under duress. He thought that he was going to be killed if he didn't tell them what they wanted to hear. And, who knows? I know this is a long stretch of what I'm suggesting, and it could be completely bogus, and in fact it probably is. But it's just a theory that I summarized whilst reading this. And the true culprit could be someone that the police never questioned. It could be someone completely different. Ultimately, no one was convicted. To this day, locals say that a ghostly apparition in the form of an elderly woman can be seen walking on the DeFoor's estate late at night. It's believed by many that this is the ghost of Susan DeFoor. What do you think happened to the DeFoors? Do you think Asa did it? Do you think Joe Johnson was telling the truth? Do you think a family member was responsible? Do you think it was someone else entirely? What's your take on it? Look us up on Instagram, Murder Mystery History. That's all for this week. Thanks a lot for listening. Have a good day.